At its height, the British Empire stretched across 13 million square miles, touching every corner of the globe and ruling over 458 million people. Maps were colored pink to reflect its vast reach, and history books often paint it as a story of progress, civilization, and achievement. But beneath the glossy surface lies a much darker narrative, one of systemic violence, exploitation, and cultural destruction that has been hidden or downplayed for centuries. In this video, we peel back the layers of imperial myth to reveal the realities often left out of mainstream history. From forced relocations in Africa to engineered famines in India, from mass killings during uprisings to the devastating legacy of slavery, the true story of the British Empire is both shocking and eye-opening. These are not just tales of the distant past, they are events whose consequences still echo in societies around the world today. As we journey through this history, you will meet stories of resilience, of people who fought back against oppression, and of entire communities whose lives were forever altered. This is not about blame, it is about understanding, uncovering the truth, and learning from the past so that we can better shape the future. If you are ready to explore the untold side of history, uncover the hidden truths, and challenge what you thought you knew, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with friends and family, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into history's hidden stories. Do not forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an episode, because the story of the past is far more gripping than you have ever imagined. Let us begin uncovering the dark legacies that shaped the world. As the British Empire extended its reach across continents, its influence was often justified under the banners of civilization, progress, and order. Yet hidden behind these noble claims was a system meticulously designed to enforce control and suppress dissent. One of the most striking revelations came decades later, with the discovery of secret documents from Kenya's independence in 1963. These records, long concealed in a facility linked to intelligence services, uncovered the extent to which colonial authorities had institutionalized violence, surveillance, and coercion. Far from being isolated incidents, acts of torture, mass killings, and forced relocations were part of a deliberate strategy sanctioned from the highest levels of government in London, demonstrating a chilling coordination that reached deep into the heart of Kenyan society. The documents revealed the scale of the British approach to dominance, where symbols of authority carried messages of racial hierarchy and power. The Order of Smikle and St. George, a prestigious award given to British officials serving abroad, exemplified this mindset. Its design, showing the angel Smikle standing over a devil depicted as a black man, was not merely decorative, it was a stark visual representation of the ideology that underpinned imperial administration, normalizing the subjugation of colonized peoples and embedding racial dominance into the very fabric of governance. Such symbols served as constant reminders to both the colonizers and the colonized of the perceived natural order, reinforcing obedience while concealing the human cost of empire behind ceremonial pomp. Within Kenya, the impact of this systemic oppression was devastating. The Moi Uprising, one of the most violent resistance movements during the 1950s, was met with extraordinary brutality. Entire communities were uprooted, forced into fortified villages or concentration-style camps, where disease, starvation, and indiscriminate punishment claimed countless lives. Women and children endured physical abuse, psychological terror, and public humiliation. While the colonial administration documented and monitored these measures with clinical precision, the new documents confirm that these were not rogue acts of violence but coordinated operations, meticulously planned and executed to maintain control over a population seeking freedom and self-determination. The broader implications of these revelations challenge long-standing narratives about the empire's civilizing mission. They demonstrate that the structures of power were not only military and administrative but deeply cultural and symbolic, teaching submission while erasing local identities. Institutions, awards, and official ceremonies were intertwined with the exercise of power, shaping perceptions and reinforcing a hierarchy that justified extreme measures. Scholars and historians, upon reviewing these documents, have begun to piece together a fuller account of the human toll, exposing how imperial authority relied not just on conquest, but on the systematic dehumanization of those it governed. By connecting the hidden records from Kenya with the visible symbols and awards of the empire, a more coherent story emerges, one in which the mechanisms of colonial power were both overt and covert, ceremonial and violent, practical and ideological. This integrated perspective reveals the empire as a complex machine of control, where policy, symbolism, and force work together to maintain dominance across vast territories, leaving a legacy whose echoes are still felt today in the social, political, and cultural landscapes of former colonies. It is a story that goes beyond textbooks and monuments, challenging us to confront the full spectrum of historical realities that shape nations and lives in ways that are both profound and unsettling. The story of British colonial rule is not one of distant abstraction or sanitized history, but of deeply human consequences that unfolded across continents, leaving scars that continue to shape societies today. In Kenya, the Momo uprising during the 1950s became a vivid testament to the brutality inherent in imperial control, where ordinary families were caught in the crossfire of a struggle for land, dignity, and freedom. The Kikuyu people, whose lands had been expropriated to make way for European settlers, faced a campaign of systematic repression. Entire communities were relocated into fortified villages and detention camps, where hunger, disease, and relentless violence became daily realities. The British authorities employed tactics that went far beyond conventional military engagement, using forced labor, beatings, and psychological terror to break resistance while keeping meticulous records of their operations, ensuring that the machinery of oppression was methodical and comprehensive. Across the Indian subcontinent, the consequences of colonial policies were no less devastating, though they manifested in different forms. The extraction of wealth, the restructuring of agriculture to serve imperial interests, and the prioritization of foreign markets over local sustenance created conditions of extreme poverty and chronic famine. Millions suffered and died as a direct result of policies designed to maintain economic dominance rather than alleviate human suffering and traditional systems of governance. Local economies and cultural practices were systematically dismantled to impose foreign control. The Bengal famine of 1943, for example, was exacerbated by the diversion of food to support the British war effort, revealing a calculated indifference to the lives of millions. In both Kenya and India, the colonial state relied not just on brute force, but on the manipulation of social and economic structures, ensuring that local populations remained dependent, subjugated, and politically marginalized. The reach of these policies was not limited to immediate physical harm. They undermined the very fabric of societies, eroding cultural identity, traditions, and communal cohesion. In Kenya, children grew up in environments where their elders were imprisoned or tortured, disrupting the transmission of knowledge, culture, and language. While in India, centuries-old social structures and local economies were replaced with systems that prioritized exports and foreign profit over human well-being. Generations were shaped under conditions of deprivation and control, leaving legacies of trauma, inequality, and disrupted social cohesion that continue to influence contemporary life. The broader pattern of colonial rule reveals a disturbing consistency. Wherever the British Empire extended, the mechanisms of domination were applied with similar precision, combining violence, economic exploitation, and cultural suppression to enforce authority. Resistance, whether through rebellion in Kenya or protests in India, was met with calculated reprisals, illustrating that the imperial agenda was not merely about administration or trade, but about establishing and maintaining absolute control. These historical realities challenge simplified narratives of colonial benevolence or progress, demanding instead a recognition of the profound human costs, the suffering endured by millions, and the resilience of those who resisted despite overwhelming odds. In weaving together the experiences of Kenya and India, the story of colonial rule emerges as a single, interconnected tapestry of oppression, revealing not only the immediate horrors of violence and deprivation but also the long-term consequences for generations. It is a history of power exercised with ruthless efficiency, of lives disrupted, and of cultures constrained under the weight of foreign dominance. Understanding this history is essential, not only to honor those who suffered and resisted, but also to confront the enduring structures and legacies that continue to shape the post-colonial world, offering insight into how the past persists in the present and how the echoes of empire continue to resonate in the lives of millions. Long before the uprisings in Kenya or the famines in India, the British Empire had already cemented its reputation for systemic exploitation through its central role in the transatlantic slave trade, a chapter of history whose consequences echo across generations. Over the course of several centuries, British ships transported more than 3 million Africans from their homelands to the Americas, uprooting families, shattering communities, and condemning countless lives to unimaginable suffering. These journeys across the Atlantic were marked by cruelty at every turn. Overcrowded holds, rampant disease, starvation, and physical abuse were daily realities for those on board, turning the voyage itself into an ordeal of survival that many did not survive. Families were torn apart, cultural practices disrupted, and the social fabric of entire regions in Africa was irreversibly altered. The economic motivations behind this trade were stark and ruthless. The labor of enslaved Africans fueled plantations, mines, and industries that enriched Britain and built the wealth of cities and ports, embedding slavery deeply into the imperial economy. Yet behind these calculations of profit lay the human cost. Women and children forced to work in dehumanizing conditions, denied basic dignity, and subjected to punishments that were both arbitrary and brutal. The trauma inflicted was not temporary but intergenerational, leaving scars that persisted long after slavery itself was abolished. Communities that had thrived for centuries were destabilized, knowledge and traditions lost, and survivors carried the weight of their experiences into future generations, shaping identities and social structures in ways that continue to resonate today. The transatlantic slave trade also exemplified the ideological apparatus of empire. Africans were not only physically dominated but systematically dehumanized, portrayed as commodities to be bought, sold, and exploited. This dehumanization extended beyond the ship and the plantation. It permeated legal systems, economic structures, and social hierarchies, creating lasting inequities and social divisions. The psychological impact on enslaved people and their descendants was profound. As families were separated, languages suppressed, and cultural practices erased, even centuries later, the echoes of these policies are visible in disparities in wealth, access, and opportunity that trace back to the structural inequalities imposed by the empire. What is particularly revealing is how the slave trade intertwined with other facets of British imperialism. The extraction of resources, the imposition of foreign governance, and the suppression of local resistance in colonies across Africa, the Americas, and the Caribbean were part of a broader strategy to control human and natural resources for imperial gain. The patterns of dominance, exploitation, and systematic violence observed in the slave trade later appeared in other colonial contexts, whether through forced labor in India, the concentration camps in India, or the engineered famines across British-controlled territories. Each instance was a continuation of the same philosophy, that imperial power justified extreme measures, and human suffering was a tolerable, even necessary, cost in the pursuit of wealth and control. By tracing the impact of the transatlantic slave trade, it becomes clear that the British Empire's legacy is not merely a story of conquest and administration, but of profound human disruption and enduring trauma. The experiences of those enslaved, the destruction of African communities, and the lasting inequalities that followed are inseparable from the broader narrative of imperial exploitation, connecting the forced labor of millions in the Americas to the systemic violence and oppression witnessed in colonies across the globe. Understanding this chapter is essential to comprehending the full scope of the empire's dark legacies, for it illustrates how the pursuit of power and profit was built on the suffering of generations, and how that suffering continues to shape the world today. The history of the British Empire is punctuated by conflicts that reveal the extreme lengths to which imperial power was enforced, leaving a legacy of devastation that reshaped entire regions and cultures. In southern Africa, the Anglo-Zulu War of 1879 stands as a stark example of this relentless assertion of control, where the Zulu Kingdom, one of the most organized and formidable African states, faced an onslaught designed to seize land, exploit labor, and suppress a proud people. Despite assembling an army far outnumbered by British troops, the Zulu fought with remarkable courage. Yet the superior weaponry and strategic campaigns of the British eventually decimated their forces, dismantled their monarchy, and partitioned their lands into autonomous regions that served imperial interests. The loss extended beyond the battlefield. It disrupted social structures, cultural practices, and economic independence, creating a void that generations of Zulu people would struggle to reclaim. In India, the Amritsar massacre of 1919 revealed the lethal combination of military authority and colonial governance, where unarmed civilians gathered in a public space for both religious celebration and protest against oppressive laws were met with indiscriminate gunfire. The soldiers' attack, ordered by Brigadier General Reginald Dyer, resulted in hundreds of deaths and injuries, sending shockwaves throughout the country and eliciting condemnation across the globe. Yet the British administration's response highlighted the deep-seated ideology underpinning imperial rule, defending Dyer while minimizing accountability, and underscoring the expendability of colonized lives in the eyes of empire. This event not only traumatized the local population but also cemented patterns of suppression that would recur in other contexts, where military force was leveraged to silence dissent and maintain economic and political control. Similarly, the Anglo-Boer War in South Africa at the turn of the 20th century showcased the systemic cruelty embedded in imperial strategies. British forces, under the command of General Kitchener, implemented a scorched earth policy and established concentration camps that housed Boer women and children, exposing them to malnutrition, disease, and violence. Tens of thousands perished, while black Africans caught in the crossfire suffered displacement, forced labor, and additional mortality that often went undocumented. The campaigns were not merely about defeating an enemy on the battlefield, but about restructuring the social and economic landscape to serve imperial interests, destroying communities that resisted domination, and consolidating British control over valuable land and resources. In the mid-20th century, the Biafran War in Nigeria reflected the enduring consequences of British colonial manipulation long after formal decolonization. Ethnic tensions, political fragmentation, and economic disparities were intensified by British policies that had deliberately amalgamated disparate regions without regard for cultural, linguistic, or religious differences. When the Igbo people attempted to secede and form Biafra, The Nigerian federal government, with British support in the form of weapons and strategic guidance, implemented blockades and military campaigns that resulted in the deaths of millions from famine, disease, and warfare. This conflict illustrated how the legacy of colonialism could orchestrate large-scale human suffering, perpetuating cycles of violence even decades after direct rule had ended. Taken together, these conflicts illuminate a consistent pattern: the use of military might, systematic violence, and cultural suppression to assert imperial authority and secure economic and political dominance. From the battlefields of Zululand to the streets of Amritsar, from Boer concentration camps to the starvation of Biafra, the British Empire's campaigns were not isolated incidents but interconnected strategies that reinforced a worldview where colonized peoples were subjected to dispossession, oppression, and erasure. They demonstrate how colonial policies were enforced with devastating efficiency, leaving scars on the social fabric, collective memory, and cultural identity of affected societies, and reminding us that the legacies of these conflicts continue to shape contemporary struggles for justice, recognition, and restoration. The catastrophic human toll of British imperial policies is perhaps most vividly illustrated through engineered famines and politically motivated divisions that left millions dead and displaced across generations. In 1943, Bengal endured a famine that claimed the lives of millions, not as a result of natural disaster alone, but due to deliberate administrative decisions that prioritized wartime logistics over human survival. Cyclones and crop failures created vulnerabilities. Yet the British colonial government compounded the crisis by diverting food supplies to support troops and allies abroad, while restricting local populations from accessing grain reserves. Prices soared, starvation spread, and desperate communities were left to fend for themselves, resorting to eating grass, leaves, or any meager sustenance they could find. The indifference of those in power, coupled with overt prejudice, as reflected in the dismissive remarks of high-ranking officials, transformed a natural calamity into a man-made catastrophe, demonstrating how imperial priorities consistently valued strategic or economic interests over the lives of colonized peoples. Half a century earlier, Ireland experienced the devastating consequences of the potato famine, where a similar combination of natural blight and deliberate policy decisions led to the deaths of over 1 million people. While the potato crop failed due to disease, the British administration, led by officials like Charles Trelian, actively delayed relief efforts, tied aid to labor requirements, and maintained export policies that prioritized the empire's economic benefit. Tenant farmers, already dispossessed and impoverished, were left with no food for themselves as the harvest that sustained local populations was sold abroad, intensifying the suffering of an already marginalized population. The famine accelerated waves of emigration, uprooting families and leaving a lasting mark on Ireland's demographic, cultural, and social landscape, while highlighting the systemic neglect and contempt that defined imperial governance. The partition of India in 1947 further illustrates the human cost of political decisions made to maintain imperial interests, even as formal rule receded. When the British divided their Indian colony along religious lines, creating the nations of India and Pakistan, the process was hurried, poorly planned, and detached from the realities of local populations. Millions were uprooted from their homes, forced to migrate across newly drawn borders, often with nothing more than the clothes on their backs. Violence erupted on a massive scale, fueled by fear, retaliation, and centuries of social tension that were exacerbated by colonial policies of divide and rule. Entire communities were decimated, lives were lost in mass killings, and the upheaval left enduring scars on both nations. As families were separated, cultural ties severed, and economic systems destabilized. Together, These events reveal a pattern in which the exercise of imperial power was intimately connected to social engineering, economic exploitation, and disregard for human life, whether through famine, forced migration, or political petition. The British Empire repeatedly imposed policies that intensified suffering and entrenched structural inequalities. These tragedies were not mere accidents of history, but consequences of deliberate decision-making designed to maintain control, extract resources, or engineer political outcomes favorable to imperial interests. The Bengal famine, the Irish potato famine, and the partition of India are connected by this through line of systemic disregard for the well-being of colonized peoples, each event leaving a legacy of trauma, loss, and disrupted societies that reverberates to this day. Shaping economic, social, and cultural landscapes in ways that continue to inform contemporary struggles for justice, equity, and historical reckoning. As we reflect on the vast expanse of the British Empire and the centuries of control it exerted over millions of people across continents, it becomes clear that the legacies of colonialism are far from distant history. They are living realities that continue to shape the world today. From Africa to Asia, from India to the Americas, the policies and practices of imperial rule left deep and enduring scars on societies, economies, and cultures. Land that was once home to thriving communities was forcibly taken to benefit colonial settlers or to supply imperial markets, uprooting generations and severing people from the resources and traditions that sustained them. Entire cultures and languages were suppressed, traditional systems of governance dismantled, and priceless artifacts looted, leaving cultural voids that have proven difficult to fill even decades later. The economic consequences were just as devastating. Colonized regions were forced into dependency on imperial trade. Local industries were disrupted or destroyed, and wealth was extracted systematically, creating cycles of poverty that, in many cases, persist today. Communities that once enjoyed relative autonomy were left with distorted economies designed to serve distant powers, and this economic imbalance continues to limit opportunities, perpetuate inequality, and hinder sustainable development in former colonies. Social hierarchies imposed during colonial times, often based on racial or ethnic divisions, have left enduring legacies of discrimination and marginalization, creating intergenerational trauma that shapes social dynamics. Political conflict, an identity even now, but perhaps the most profound legacy is the human one. Families were torn apart through forced labor, slavery, famine, and mass displacement. Entire populations were subjected to violence and systemic oppression. These experiences left psychological and emotional imprints that transcend generations, influencing community cohesion, cultural confidence, and personal identity. Understanding this history is not about assigning blame to present generations. It is about recognizing the structural and historical forces that shaped societies and continue to affect millions today. It is about acknowledging the resilience of those who survived, resisted, and fought to reclaim their dignity, heritage, and rights in the face of overwhelming oppression. By confronting these truths, we honor the memories of those who suffered and ensure that the lessons of history are not forgotten. The story of the British Empire is not only a story of power and exploitation, but also of human endurance, resistance, and the ongoing struggle for justice. If this journey through history has expanded your understanding of the world and the forces that have shaped it, please support the channel by hitting the like button, sharing this video with your friends and family, and subscribing for more in-depth explorations of untold stories from the past. Your engagement helps keep these important narratives alive, ensuring that the lessons, the struggles, and the resilience of those who lived through these dark chapters are remembered and carried forward for generations to come. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to continuing this journey of discovery with you.